Well, hello everyone and welcome to this webinar, Partnering with Parents, the Benefits and the Challenges. My name's Kathryn Wallis and I'm a consultant with Early Childhood Australia and I'm talking to you today from Canberra. And I'm presenting together with my colleague, Deb Yates. Deb, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, my name's Debbie and I'm also with Early Childhood Australia as a manager.
Thanks, Deb. So KidsMatter is funded by the Department of Health and Beyond Blue, and Early Childhood Australia is partnering with Beyond Blue and in school context with Headspace to support whole services and schools in implementing the KidsMatter framework and undertaking the professional learning that goes along with it. So is your service or school registered and participating in KidsMatter? If you are, the great news is that the webinar today and all our webinars will support your progress through the professional learning. And we've been presenting a whole series of webinars in the past few months and there's still a few more to come. If your school or service isn't registered, then we'd really encourage you to register. And we've put a link for you in the chat box you'll see there. So please feel free to also ask any questions in the chat box about participation and what's involved in growing healthy minds and wellbeing with KidsMatter. Now let's get back to today's session where we'll be reflecting on partnering with parents and exploring the benefits and discussing the challenges. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians from all the lands from which we are able to gather on today. And I'm standing on Ngunnawal country today, and I'd love it if you could pop down the name of the land that you're joining us from in the chat box. And while you're doing that, I'd like to pay my respects to elders, past, present and future, and all of those who continue to hold the memories, traditions and ways of being for all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. We recognise the importance of continued connection to culture, to country and community, to the health, the social and emotional wellbeing of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children. So let's just take a moment now to consider how we connect with all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and especially with all families and parents, and how this connection benefits their children. Let's consider how we can work in partnership with families and parents to support the mental health and wellbeing of all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children. So we're all here today to consider, to learn and reflect about early childhood, wellbeing and education. And as you can see on your screen there, these are our ways for today. So in particular, we must remember that looking after ourselves is important when we have conversations about mental health and wellbeing. And indeed, a sense of safety is the most fundamental requirement for positive mental health, a sense of security and for forming relationships. A sense of security means that people feel safe to be who they are, feel safe to be themselves. They're able to work to their strengths, that people feel safe to express their opinions and beliefs, and people feel heard and respected even when there are opposing views. And as we all know, children learn from what adults around them do. Being aware of how to look after ourselves and support each other can make a huge difference to each one of us as adults, to the wellbeing of our team, but also to the children in our care. Children build up a picture of who they are by observing adults and modelling what they do. So this is really important in relation to self-care, is when children see the adults around them looking after themselves, children learn that self-care is important. And it also relates to working in partnership with parents and families. When children see educators model and demonstrate trust, empathy and compassion, this will contribute to their learning and their wellbeing. Now today we will be asking you to interact and contribute during the webinar, and there will be opportunity for you to reflect on your practices through various polls and reflective questions that Deb and I will ask you. But we ask that you only contribute what you feel comfortable with and when you feel okay about it. So please feel free to join in via the chat box. And another thing to note about the chat box is that we'll be posting links in there, and you might like to copy those links and paste them into a Word document to follow up with after the webinar if you like. Now, sometimes when we talk about mental health and wellbeing, some unexpected feelings can emerge, even quite difficult ones. So let's be aware of the feelings that come up for us, for you, and remember to take care of yourself as we talk about mental health today. If some difficulties or difficult feelings occur, remember to have a yarn with someone, have a chat with someone that can help you. So I'd like to hand over to Deb now, who's going to take us through the next part of the webinar. Thanks, Deb.
Thanks, Kathryn. So we know families are central to children's mental health. Research has shown the positive impact on mental health and wellbeing when there's a close connection between educators and families. Collaborative partnerships of parents and educators share the goal of providing the child with optimal opportunities for the development of positive mental health and wellbeing. So today we'll be looking at 3 key areas: why collaborative partnerships with parents are so important, one of the best ways that early childhood educators can support parents and carers in their parenting role is to develop collaborative partnerships with them. We'll be looking at developing partnerships with parents, exploring how parents, carers and educators can work collaboratively for better outcomes for children's mental health and wellbeing. And finally, supporting and strengthening partnerships with parents, reflecting on how well we manage these partnerships. How well do early learning services successfully engage all parents and carers? So let's take a poll now. You'll see up on your screen the question, what percentage of parents do you think have a strong partnership with your early learning service? So if you want to I'll give everyone a moment to just put their poll things in there. It's great to see some interaction here today. So it looks like the majority of people are saying about 75% or even perhaps 90% of parents have a strong partnership with their early learning service, according to our poll. Some people have got it down at 50 or 40%, so obviously maybe that's an area that you've chosen to work on, which might be why you've come along to our webinar here today. You can always feel free to also put some comments in chat as well if you'd like about this question. Thanks, Maria. Can we pop to the next slide? So from the responses, we can see that many of you already connect and partner with parents in positive ways. And you've possibly registered for this because you're looking at finding alternative ways or to increase that partnership over time. So I'd just like to, at this point, put in a reminder that in the webinar, we use the terms parents and carers to include any people who play a significant parenting role with a child. They may not necessarily be biologically related to the child or even live with the child all the time. A child may have one or several parents or carers. In addition to their biological parents, this could include grandparents, step-parents, foster parents, adoptive parents, aunts, uncles, really any other person who fulfills a significant portion of parenting and caregiving for the child. So please know when we use those terms, parents and carers, it's a really inclusive term for anyone who may be in that role for a child. Parenting is a key factor in promoting children's mental health, and early learning services are often seen by families as a source of support and information. There are many ways that services can work with families to support their parenting. Early learning services can help connect families with one another by providing opportunities for them to develop support networks with other families. These connections can be a source of support for families, which can also then be a protective factor for the mental health of children and parents. Great to see some conversation in the chat coming up around Having conversations with parents and having feedback and ideas to share with the service is really important, and spending that time there. We know partnerships benefit children's mental health and wellbeing, and that family and educator partnerships benefit children, the families, the educators, the service, and they actually can flow on to the whole community. For children, strong partnerships lead to an enhanced experience in the early learning setting. They feel secure and accepted when they observe the warm relationships between their family and their educators. This supports children's developing social skills, strengthens connections to their culture and their sense of identity. Research indicates that academic achievement is enhanced when parents and carers actively participate in their child's education setting. For families, partnerships with educators can lead to a stronger relationship with their child. They develop a greater understanding of the important role educators play in the child's early years and can become more confident and active in their parenting role, supporting their child's development. When parents and educators work together respectfully, children learn best and feel more confident and positive. It often leads to families developing an increased appreciation of the significance and value of the early childhood education and a respect for the educators. A positive relationship with educators also enables parents and carers to address any concerns they may have about their child's learning and development more quickly. For educators and services, a partnership with families provides a more complete picture of each child, creating opportunities for open and effective communication with sharing of information, knowledge, and enables collaborative decision making. Parents want the best for their children and they know their children and family best. Tapping into this information is invaluable. It's a great resource for early childhood educators. When families feel understood and supported, they experience better health and wellbeing too. It's great to see some more comments coming up in the chat about acknowledging parents and feelings is really important. For communities, early learning services and families contribute in different and complementary ways to a child's learning, and partnerships must reflect an awareness of the interdependence of these groups and individuals and the wider context in which children live and learn, so that everyone feels supported and connected. So today's webinar will assist many of you to recognise and celebrate what you're already doing well. I'm sure there's a lot of great work happening out there, and to know what actions you could take to improve practice, reflect on practice, and have a sound understanding of what's worth spending your time on. We know there are a number of risk and protective factors which influence mental health and wellbeing in early childhood. The impact of these factors can vary depending upon a child's temperament and circumstances, and many are family related. By identifying these factors and focusing on increasing the protective factors, children are more able to deal with those ups and downs of everyday life. Research evidence shows that collaborative partnerships between educators and families is a strong mental health protective factor. These partnerships are strengthened even more if early childhood services also provide support for parenting in a way that's accessible for all families. One example is in the Kimberley, parent surveys were adapted to using visual symbols and local language for a particular service in that community. If early childhood services establish effective communication between educators and families, and also when they build connections between families so that they can support each other. These are all really good examples of strong partnerships. So the diagram you can see on your screen, it shows some, not all, but some of the risks and protections in relation to a balanced scale. The risks listed are those factors which we probably could have little impact on, although there are some others which we can affect. But what we can do is increase the factors on the right-hand side of the scale to reduce the effect of the factors on the left-hand side of the scale. So increasing the protections to then decrease the impact of the risks. Partnerships between educators and families increase all the protective factors shown on the scale and can assist in building resilience. There's a great link which will be coming up in the chat box, which has just provides some more information around those risk and protective factors if you'd like to learn more. So let's consider the connection between partnerships and mental health and wellbeing. When planning for families to become partners in their child's learning journey, educators need to be aware of different parenting styles and their influence. Educators need to emphasise the benefits of adult-child interaction for children's developing emotional and social skills as well as their cognitive learning. The goal is for all adults to support the child sensitively and appropriately. A baby's early relationships with a parent develop through things like physical touch, making eye contact, cooing and babbling. This starts that serve and return process, often initiated by the baby, which establishes learning pathways and connections in the brain. These interactions shape brain architecture, and this is how the brain learns and then continues to learn in the future. Research has confirmed that relationships and emotions are central to all learning, and quality relationships lead to quality learning. We should not underestimate the impact of the quality of the relationship. Children learn so much from what they experience, see, hear, and feel. If research clearly shows us that children learn by watching and observing adults, we need to model our values at all times. One of our previous webinars, Children's Behaviour and Our Interactions, there'll be a link coming up to the recording in the chat, discusses how our interactions with children influence their behaviour. In the book, The Students Are Watching by Ted Sizer, discussed the considerable impact on secondary students of adult behaviour, both towards students and between each other. This is probably even more significant in early childhood when foundations are being established. Positive relationships with families are enhanced by collaborative partnerships. When children see these partnerships in action, this affects their well-being in a positive way. So what does this look like in action? We'll be exploring collaborative partnerships in more depth now, and while we're doing that, we'd like you to please think about the following questions and write any thoughts that come to mind in the chat box. As I say them out loud, I'll give you a moment to consider the questions and write your thoughts. So, what are collaborative partnerships between families and educators like in practice? What do they look like, sound like, feel like? So one of the comments in chat says, the families feel comfortable enough to have meaningful conversations. They tend to stay a while at the centre before leaving. Having open and easy discussions. They're trusting and making decisions together. Open and honest. Positive, non-judgmental and non-biased. They're great words. Acknowledging parents' feelings and their ideas. And they have supportive interactions. And I think that's one of the things we can actually do is thinking about our own relationships in our lives and important partnerships in our life. When we're in a partnership that we would perhaps describe as collaborative, you often consider it as a way where we accept each other, you trust each other, and there's a commitment to each other. One of the other chat comments is saying about listening to each other and using each other's knowledge and strengths. So we know collaboration is based on good communication, respectful relationships in which each person's unique perspectives and contributions are valued, acknowledged, and decision-making is shared. Collaborative partnerships involve families and early learning services working together with a shared goal, a goal of optimising the children's development and mental health and wellbeing. Everyone benefits from families and services working together in this collaborative partnership. It's really easy to use that term collaborative partnership, but how easy is it to put into practice? And we can also consider, are there differences between involvement and partnership? We often use that term parent involvement in our early learning services. But does that term parent involvement necessarily mean that there's a collaborative partnership? Often a partnership is more than just involvement. Parents may be involved in a management committee or a fundraising project, which are really valuable as well for the service. but that's not always a partnership that contributes to positive learning outcomes for their child. So why do we use the term then collaborative, and what do we mean by that? Has anyone got any thoughts about how the term collaborative relates differently to the term involvement? I think some of the comments around valued input and that it's culturally appropriate, and the service reflecting the community that it sits within, and building on mutual respect. That's a word that's coming up a lot in the chat box, that element of there being respect and working together. So often you might hear the words around collaboration. Language often can be combined, shared, joint, two-way, cooperative. Working towards a partnership is a process that happens over time. It may take longer with some families than others. When parents, carers and educators feel comfortable with each other, they're able to work together for the child's benefit, combining and sharing their knowledge and establishing two-way communication. Partnerships between parents and early childhood educators supports the relationships between parents and their children. Research has shown that people with large support networks have enhanced health and wellbeing, and they recover better when things get tough. Partnerships between families and educators act as an additional support network for parents and carers, increasing their own wellbeing and having a positive flow-on effect for their children. Parents and carers are also more likely to access external information and support when they have a positive relationship with their early learning service. So what are these characteristics of a collaborative partnership? You can see quite a lot of them coming up in the chat already. Things like sense of ownership with decision making and trying to see parents' concerns from their perspective, putting ourselves in their shoes and trying to support each other. Those two-way conversations that meet both needs. So some of those characteristics around collaboration, a collaborative partnership, are things like conversations with families that are individualised about their child, educators being able to empathise when families are having a difficult time, resources being readily available to support families in times of need. So there's an efficient system for regularly communicating about the program and the child's learning. That information is provided to enable families to build on the child's learning at home, and that family members are supported to share skills, interests and knowledge with the service. That meetings can be held or parent conferences to discuss learning and set joint goals. That family events are organised to foster relationships between the family and the service, and also between families together. We know that the development of information and communication technologies has opened up new opportunities to connect with and share information with families. Do you as a service use any digital technology to communicate with families? If so, you can put that information in the chat as well about what you might be doing that's working well. So digital technologies do not take away from communicating face-to-face with families, but it can complement these and offer another options for communication, especially for some families where personal contact might be limited. More families are now using electronic and social media to communicate. Services do need to check with families that they have these communication methods and that they want to use them, not just assume, and make alternate arrangements for those families who don't want to. Visual forms of recording experiences appeal to both children and families. And for children who might be too young to communicate or who are non-verbal, or for children who speak in languages other than English, images can really support the child and the family to talk about and understand the program. And this can go both ways, with families also sharing information and visuals from their home life, such as photos, videos. They could email in a story, or perhaps sharing a web page to a local cultural festival that they may be attending, so others in the service could know about it too. It's really great to see so many comments coming up in the chat about how people are using technology as part of their communication sharing with families. So we're just going to have a couple of comments that have come through from parents, educators, consultants and professionals about partnerships with parents. So a parent comment was, things that I think develop positive relationships between educators and parents are things like trust. If you don't trust the educators to provide the services your child needs, then it's not going to work. The trust needs to go both ways. We need to communicate what is happening and be on the same page, so there's always a smooth transition between home and the service. A consultant has said, when children can witness their family and educators laughing together, being relaxed together and enjoying each other's company, that really does help build the child's sense of security and help build the relationship between the child and the educator. Kathryn, did you want to share the next two?
Sure, Deb. So some reflections from a centre director were that when you know families really, really well, you can tell that they feel welcome in your environment. They're really forthcoming with interaction and giving you suggestions and ideas and really become engaged and involved in your program. And this comment really reflects some of the things that have been noted in the chat box. Another reflection is from a psychologist, and they've said, I think when you respect families, you appreciate how vulnerable they are. They're vulnerable in the sense that they're bringing their most precious thing in their life for you to be responsible for big periods of the day. So what supports them to feel welcome and at ease is that there's transparency of communication between themselves and the educator. Thanks, Deb. I'll now continue with the next part of the webinar. So hearing these comments and reflections from others helps to reflect ourselves on what actions we can take, and in particular how we might respond to parents who are experiencing challenges and need support. How well do you know all of your family? What types of things might families say to you that demonstrate that they're under pressure and need support? And how might you respond? Parents who have concerns about their child need to feel valued, safe and reassured, but they also need to have reliable, honest information shared with them in an empathetic way. So have a look at the link that we're just about to pop in the chat. This is a great tool to use when you're organising to meet with parents, particularly if you would like to discuss some concerns that you may have about their child. Working in partnership with parents can be challenging, and these challenges should be viewed as opportunities for educators and families to find new ways of working together. So let's reflect now on some of the ways that educators and services can develop collaborative relationships with families. And thank you, Michelle. She's typed in the chat box, responding normally with a good listening ear is a really good technique to developing collaborative relationships. So you might like to reflect now on how you communicate with family. So in relation to relationships and partnerships, communication really is the basis of all of those. So do you reach and engage with all families? And are you innovative in your approach to families who are not engaged? So in the chat box, we've seen people listing quite a range of information technologies that they use to engage with families and that are quite innovative. So that's fantastic. Here are some other ideas. So getting to know families through regular informal discussions and at planned gatherings. So you might like to reflect upon where are the opportunities for families and educators to have informal chats, but also is there opportunities through the year where parents can come and talk to educators in more planned or formal ways. Learning and sharing aspects of families' culture and also educators' culture that are attending your service can also go a long way to developing partnerships. That sharing, that giving a part of yourself and a part of families is really important. Another idea is actually undertaking professional learning. So like you're doing today by coming to this webinar, this will help support the development of partnerships with families. Another idea is encouraging educators to engage in reflective practice and professional conversations about their everyday interactions with families. So when we do have that time to reflect with others, with our colleagues, having those conversations about interactions with families. Another idea is putting systems in place so that educators can have regular supervision, support and mentoring. So there might be some educators at your service who are really fantastic at engaging with families, and they might be able to support other educators in developing skills and knowledge and confidence in this area of their work. And thank you, Rebecca, has popped in the chat box there. Hosting regular events such as morning tea, school transition meetings with families and local schools is another way to develop partnerships. Families can see that you want to work together in relation to their child. So we'll now take a bit more of a look in depth at actions that we can take to develop partnerships. So here are some key ideas and strategies that can be used to guide our practice in developing collaborative partnerships. So both the Early Years Learning Framework and the National Quality Standards emphasise partnerships. The Early Years Learning Framework emphasises partnerships between early childhood services, families and the community. And as you'll be familiar with, the National Quality Standard Quality Area 6 identifies elements of collaborative partnerships with parents. When we look at the significance of partnerships to mental health and wellbeing, we bring a specific mental health lens that focuses on particular aspects of thinking and planning. And this thinking and planning can fit well into a service's quality improvement plan. So I think for me, the big message from our webinar is that collaborative partnerships with families are a protective factor for children's mental health. So that is something that you can do to support children's wellbeing. So what actions can we take? Something that's really useful is to start with positive beliefs about families. So Janice Kaiser in her book, From Parents to Partners, and also Marge Whaley in her book, Involving Parents in Children's Learning. So a couple of parenting authors particularly emphasise this point. But most parents want the best for their children, but some need support. So if we come from that mindset, it can be really helpful in establishing partnerships and collaborative relationships. Many parents are really well-intentioned, are really trying to do the right thing by their children, but some may experience feelings of guilt and of self-doubt about whether they're doing enough of the right thing. If you use a strengths-based approach though, which is by starting by identifying what parents are doing really well, that can be really helpful. It's like when we think about working with children, working with their strengths. We need to build protective factors into our practice and be sensitive to diversity and accept that families will engage with educators and services at different levels and in different ways, and indeed sometimes not at all. And if we're accepting of all of that, it really helps for partnerships. If you have the opportunity to talk together about educator understanding, you can encourage educators to discuss what they understand about the terms like partnership and collaboration. What do we mean when we use these terms? And to build shared meaning among all staff. So having that common understanding about partnerships and collaboration can really help. This can help educators to view the service through the eyes of a parent and recognise that just like children, when parents can see themselves in a space, they're more likely to feel connected. And I think one of our webinar participants noted this in the chat box earlier on about reflecting the community in your space is really important for partnerships. Creating a welcoming environment is also one way to develop partnerships. If you spend time with families and make time to stop and to listen and look at your service environment with fresh eyes, you might like to seek the views of people who've never been to your service about how welcome it is. So when they first walk in, what does it sound like? What does it look like? What does it feel like when you first walk in? So when you first, come into the car park or hop off the bus and come through that front door, what does it feel like? Is there a space for families to sit comfortably and just to watch their children? Do you encourage families to hang around and to stay? Are there informal opportunities throughout the year for educators to interact with families? So there's been some comments in the chat about all sorts of different events throughout the year. It's really important to consider the first feelings that families have when they walk into a service will determine how they begin to build relationships with staff. Those first impressions are really so important. So things like when parents come to visit your service for perhaps a little bit of a look around, do educators introduce themselves to the parent that might be having a look around the room and the centre. Another thing that we can do is working on improving communication skills. Listen to family. There's several tools that can help you to do this. One tool, we'll pop a little link to the chat in the chat, is called the Stop, Reflect and Act process. And this can be really useful in building skills, but also knowledge and confidence in interacting with parents. Sometimes just the confidence in interacting and having conversations with parents is something that we might need to encourage. So that these sorts of tools which explicitly talk about communication skills are really useful. Sharing knowledge and concerns. So establishing two-way, open and honest sharing, particularly when there are concerns, is really important. And you really want to start developing relationships with families and partnerships before talking about concerns. So, for example, there's the observation and reflection chart. We'll also pop that link in the chat box. This can be used to document concerns in a concise and clear way to be able to then share with parents. And whilst at the same time acknowledging parents' knowledge and expertise about their child. And such two-way sharing really helps to communicate to parents that educators care about and indeed notice their child and want to work together with them in order to come up with solutions that are really helpful for the wellbeing of their child. The next point that I want to make is about including parents in decision making. So seeking the input of families about decisions at your service is important. Parents and families need to feel that their contributions are important, valued and needed for there to be partnerships. This is really crucial. So one service, when thinking about how to create a greater sense of community, they actually surveyed educators and families about to be able to build a more accurate picture of the strengths and areas that needed more focus. So if you seek feedback from parents about this, that can really help you. And jointly, this service developed goals and an action plan, which included involving children and families in making decisions about the centre's outdoor environment and sustainable practice. So really, truly seeking views and collaborating is really important. And these are all strong foundations for partnerships. So seeking input in the first place is really important. And we popped a little link in the chat box there about using surveys. And yeah, I'm wondering whether you've used surveys at your place. Okay, so this is all good, but of course we know that there are things that get in the way. So what are the things that get in the way of developing partnerships with families? You might like to reflect on these questions in relation to yourself and also your service. You might like to ask these questions in a staff meeting or for staff to reflect on. So effective partnerships really do depend on engagement. We often reflect about our practice with children, but how often do we reflect on the ways that we interact with parents? Do we ask ourselves the hard questions about sharing difficult information and meeting the needs of all families? Another question to ask is, how well do we engage with all of our families? When we did the poll before, a lot of people responded by saying sort of 75% or 90% of our families we engage with really well. But what about that other 10% or 25%? Do we sometimes fall into the trap of us and them thinking, which is also known as othering of parents, or even attributing some responsibility on families for children's difficulties? This sort of thinking can be a barrier in developing partnerships. So Janice Kaiser, again, gives a great example of this, is about not letting prejudgment of someone get in the way of developing a relationship with them. And that goes back to the earlier point that we made about having positive beliefs about families. How do we know what parents think and need? And how do we find out what it is that parents want and need from our service? Do we make assumptions about what parents think and want and how they might be feeling? Do we think or even say out loud that they're not interested or they're too busy and they just leave it up to us because we know what we're doing? Have a think about how we find out what parents want and need And we've shared lots of ideas about how you could do that, both informal and formal opportunities. It's useful to reflect upon whose responsibility it is to build collaborative partnerships. Because we know how important partnerships and connectedness are for mental health and wellbeing, it's important to make every effort to work out ways to build partnership with families and meet any challenges which might get in the way. So again, like I said before, building collaborative partnerships is something that we can do as a protective factor for children's mental health and wellbeing. So that's why this area really deserves our attention. Thank you for your comments in the chat there as well in relation to for families to share goals for children and for the service. And I've been thinking about this one, and I wonder how we set learning goals for children, but do we know how they align with parents' aspirations for their own children? Do we ask what the family's aspirations are for their children? It's a really good point, thanks. So some other ideas here for things that might get in the way are, so we've talked about sort of enablers, and here we're going to talk about barriers to parent engagement. So this information on screen has been drawn from research by Paul Pritchard, Martin O'Byrne and Sue Jenkins back in 2015. And they looked at parents as co-workers in early learning services and found these barriers to engaging parents. You might reflect on whether you have experienced these as well. So the first one on the screen there is individual resistance. So this can come from either educators or parents. So educators might be unsure of engaging parents who may appear initially difficult to engage with. We need to explore who are the families who we're not engaging with and why not, and what are the barriers to connecting with them. The next point is about a clash of practice frameworks, and this is about the way families have been responded to previously by health and community services. They might have had a poor experience at another community service, and so they might be apprehensive about entering your service. There might be a lack of local understanding of the intent of your service. So you might have families that initially come but don't come back, and it might be that they may be a little bit suspicious of the service or have concerns around the expectations of them. And so how do we demonstrate to parents that we want to share decision making with them and don't have power over them? Lack of time and patience, of course, is always a barrier to partnerships. Educators and parents both being time poor, and also, you know, our priority is often attending to the children over talking with parents at busy times. This can be a particular challenge at pick-up time when educators are trying to be with the children but also have conversations with parents. There are a few, you know, risk-averse structures and policies that inhibit practice. So sometimes the structure or policies of the service can hinder the development of collaborative partnerships. So, for example, like I just mentioned with the need to supervise children, parents might need to seek out and find where the educators are to be able to have a conversation with them, where some parents might feel a bit shy to do that and feel like educators aren't talking to them if they're not being approached. We can have a little think about behaviours and language that we use. So sometimes the environment of the service and the actual behaviour that educators communicate to parents, they're not very important. So just like I said before, if parents have to go and find an educator to talk to them or find out about the child's day, they might feel like that they're not very important and that they're not receiving any information. And it's useful to think about power here, about sharing power with parents and having collaborative relationships. There might be changes in key positions in leadership. So when parents build a rapport with a particular educator and they move on, it might just be to another room in the service or to another service. This does discourage the development of relationships, with other educators and can be really frustrating for parents. So this is why continuity of staff is really important in relation to relationships with parents as well as with children, because we don't want to disrupt the relationships that are forming. Some other barriers are around individual skills, knowledge, values and attitudes. So how a particular educator is perceived by a parent and vice versa, the educator's perception of the parent as well can be a barrier to partnership. You might like to have a look now at the recording or copy and save for later of one of our previous webinars on communication. So we'll just pop that in the chat as well. So it's further communication that can really help to develop knowledge, skills and confidence. We talked about barriers, and then we're going to talk briefly about enablers of parent engagement. The first point there is about partners in practice. So to engage parents and develop a partnership, there needs to be adopt a mindset that educators are co-learners with parents and consider themselves partners in practice. We should aim to let parents know how much we value their expertise and knowledge about their child. And we can do this by considering things like power in our relationship. So how is power shared? And how do we negotiate how we're going to work together? Which also relates to the next point there, about agreements for working together. How do we know what others consider respectful practice? And we need to make it clear that negotiating and coming to a shared understanding about how educators and families are going to work together, that's also really important. Service and worker flexibility is crucial here too. So being flexible and being able to adapt to change to the varying needs of families in your service is important in partnership. Taking time to be and developing relationships with parents takes time. It's about interactions over time. This can't be done particularly quickly. It needs to be a pattern of interactions over time that develop positive relationships. I mean, we are often time poor as educators, but the reality is that relationships with families does take time and those resources. It's more than just brief encounters that drop off and pick up time. It can be helpful to reflect on practice as an enabler of parent engagement. So how can we model reflection with parents in our everyday interactions in relation to how our relationship is developing with them? So we can develop this, how we've reflected in our actual interactions with parents. Shared understanding is really important for partnerships. It's very difficult to have a partnership or a collaboration with someone if you don't share the same, common understandings and common language. And how do we know that we share the same understanding of what the term partnerships and collaboration means? Have you ever asked parents what they understand about these terms? Leadership and a culture of practice is an enabling factor for partnerships. Deformalising our environment is also helpful. So what this means are, there's lots of things in our work that send subtle messages to parents that educators are in charge and that power is not shared. So this might not be the intention, but it's something to reflect on. Consider the entry area to your service and how welcoming it is. When parents come to your service, is it difficult to come in? Is the front gate locked? What message might that send? And we need to challenge our thinking and avoid a complacency in all our dealings with families. So it's about a culture of practice within our service, and that's seen in all that we do and how we do it. And this we must pay attention to be authentic and genuine in our attempts to build true partnerships rather than tokenistic efforts and lip service paid to the idea of partnerships. It's what parents actually see and experience in service that makes a difference. So far we looked at barriers and enablers of building partnerships with families. And we're going to have a little look here at reciprocity. So it's about the two-way nature of relationships. When educators and services position parents as the experts about their children, and when there's mutual trust and respect between parents and educators, then educators can access parents' expertise and incorporate this into their work with children. And there's a reciprocal benefit to this sharing because it really strengthens the partnerships because both parents and educators benefit. We both benefit from sharing knowledge about the child. And it's been found that the characteristic of the service itself and the quality of relationships between families and educators are strong indicators of whether or not the family will continue using the service. So that's a really important point to bear in mind. So what does an engaging service look like and feel like to families? What are the characteristics of an early learning service where they really do engage families? Here are some ideas. And one is that the environment is informal and relaxed and the staff are warm and welcoming. The structure and operation is flexible and can adapt to the varying needs of individual families. And the policies are flexible to enable responsiveness to individual situations. Another indicator is that the service is respected within the local community and has links with other community services. And that the service is purposeful in its intention to develop a genuine partnership with families and to work towards this for the best outcomes for the development and mental health and wellbeing of children. Let's take a really quick poll now. And Deb, would you like to take us through this one?
Sure, so a poll will come up on the screen and the question is, what do you think are the most significant characteristics of an educator who engages successfully with parents? So you can pick different results here. So warm and friendly and approachable are really high on the list there. And we know that that's really important from day one when they first meet families as they build that ongoing relationship. Trustworthy and non-judgmental as well. That's great.
Thank you for everyone's responses. So sometimes it is a challenge for educators and services to develop respectful partnerships with families, especially when there's been difficulties in the past. So families might have felt, as I said before, some suspicion or mistrust for a variety of reasons. And perhaps that is about having a poor experience with another service. So how do you help parents move from a place of mistrust of your service and educators trusting and engaging with you? What do you do? So some of those things in the poll before about being warm and friendly and approachable and mutual trust, they're all things that we can do. But maybe we need to reflect on how do we do being warm and friendly and approachable. So when you have a culture of practice and learning how to engage in relationships and how do we really do relationships with parents well, this critical reflection is really important. And considering, rather than thinking about certain families being hard to reach, it's more useful to think of them as being people for whom services find difficult to engage and retain. We're just going to look quickly now about how perspectives on partnering with parents have been changing over time. This diagram on the screen here really represents how over time our perspectives have changed about partnering with parents. So previously, if there was a lack of engagement with parents, it was because educators felt the parents were perceived to be hard to reach and it was their fault that the relationship was superficial. This is outlined, this sort of perspective is outlined on the left-hand side of this screen, but now our perspective has changed. There's been a shift to a much more collaborative approach with parents, with educators and services working together as partners for the development, mental health and wellbeing of all children. So this is something to reflect on in terms of where we've come from and where we're moving to in our services in collaborative relationships with parents. And thank you for all the comments in the chat box. Kate's written, putting yourself in parents' shoes is really helpful. Smiling and listening, all those communication skills, eye contact and smiling is really important for developing partnerships and moving parents from that position of perhaps mistrust to trust. And Ashley's written there, always staying positive. Absolutely. These really little things that we can do for relationships at the beginning can build partnerships and then collaborative partnerships after If we could leave to the next slide, Maria, that would be fantastic. So here's some thoughts to take away from today's webinar. We've got the conversations way symbol here on screen, and those outside connections represent conversations that we have with others. And that act of conversing with each other and sharing with each other what partnerships are all about. And they begin at the front door of our services from the moment that parents walk in. But it is important to remember that not all parents want the same level of partnerships and to find out from individual families, because each partnership will be as unique as the people who form it. And it's through partnerships that we can fill parents' emotional buckets so that their children benefit. So very briefly to explain this from a blog post that I read, parenting support should always involve warm and genuine and empathetic interactions that notice and acknowledge the parenting skills, efforts and love that parents put into being parents. Such positive interactions with educators help to fill parents' emotional buckets, which in turn benefits their children. It's a bit like what Mary Gordon said about babies, like remembering every moment that you spend with a baby or young child creates a ripple which lasts a lifetime. And we create those positive ripples every day with parents in our interactions. And so regardless of the system and the policy constraints that we work under every day, it's the way that we actually communicate respect, trust, empathy and authenticity when we work in parents that goes a long way to building positive relationships. And thank you for the comments there as well from Kate. Cultural awareness training is very important. Parents with different cultures might interact with you in different ways. It's important to have a warm and friendly educators to greet parents. And it's really important, Anita has said there, to take steps to show that parents' concerns matter. This is really important. We have a lot of research to back that parents need to feel that their concerns are valued. So thank you for today. Debbie is just going to take us through the last slide now. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathryn. So as many of you might know, these webinars are a great way to not only learn, reflect and put learning into action, but they can also assist in demonstrating our individual commitment to continued professional development. But have you heard that they can also support documentation and guide whole service or school professional learning and continuous improvement? You can contact our team today and we can assist you. So for anyone already with a participating service or school, you can simply contact your consultant. If your school or service isn't a registered participating service, it's as simple as completing a short online form and then getting started. If you'd like to know more, you can check it out today. You can also, if you're chatting with your consultant, let them know what you've learned and acted on after this event. That could be all you need to do to finish one of our professional learning topics and receive a certificate. You can join a check-in event and talk about what you've learned and done and learn with other people. The check-ins aren't check-ups. Often the consultants can actually spot that great learning and action that's already being done that sometimes us as educators or people working in services don't notice. Sometimes an outside pair of eyes and ears is easier to help us work out what we're already doing, which is great work. So at the end, please remember to complete the exit survey, which will pop up soon, and please include the names of everybody who's participating today, so and their email addresses, so that way they can also receive the information. So we'd just like to say thank you everyone for attending today, and we hope to see you online again soon.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks a lot everyone.